Sophie Reynolds never expected a simple blind date to change her life, but when she mistakes billionaire Liam Carter for someone else, their chance encounter sparks a whirlwind romance built on secrets. Can love survive when the truth finally comes out? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The early evening sun cast a warm glow through the windows of Bella's bistro as Sophie Reynolds checked her reflection one last time in her compact mirror. At 32, she had spent the last 5 years building her career as a kindergarten teacher rather than focusing on her love life. Her best friend Maggie had finally worn her down after weeks of begging. "Just one date, Sophie," Maggie had pleaded. "He's perfect for you. Smart, kind, and actually has a real job." Sophie smoothed down her simple blue dress and took a deep breath. "Table for Carter," she told the hostess, who smiled and led her through the restaurant. "Your date hasn't arrived?" "Yet," the hostess said, stopping at a table where a man sat alone nursing a glass of red wine. Sophie hesitated. The man at the table looked up, his piercing blue eyes meeting hers. He was handsome, undeniably so, with dark hair and a strong jawline. He wore a tailored grey suit that fit him perfectly, though he'd loosened his tie as if trying to appear more casual. "I think there's a mistake," Sophie started to say, but the hostess was already walking away. The man stood up, a curious expression on his face. "Are you waiting for someone?" "Yes, I'm supposed to meet a blind date. Jeff Carter, my friend Maggie." "Set it up," Sophie explained, feeling awkward. A flash of something, amusement perhaps, crossed the man's face. He glanced around the restaurant before looking back at her. "I'm Carter," he said, extending his hand. "Please, sit down." Sophie shook his hand, noticing how warm it felt against her skin. "I'm Sophie Reynolds." She took the seat across from him, setting her purse down beside her. "Maggie didn't tell me much about you, just that you work in finance?" The man, Carter, nodded slowly. "Yes, finance. Nothing too exciting." He poured her a glass of wine from the bottle on the table. "What about you?" "I'm a kindergarten teacher," Sophie replied, taking a sip of her wine. It was expensive, she could tell, much nicer than what she usually drank. "I've been teaching for 8 years now." "A teacher," Carter repeated, seeming genuinely interested. "That must be rewarding." "It is," Sophie smiled, feeling herself relax a little. "The kids keep me on my toes. Every day is different." As they ordered dinner, Sophie couldn't help but notice how the waitstaff seemed extra attentive at their table. Carter was polite to them, but there was an authority in his voice that made everyone jump to attention. "So, how do you know Maggie?" Sophie asked, cutting into her chicken. Carter hesitated for a moment. "Through mutual friends? We've crossed paths at various events." Sophie nodded, accepting his vague answer. "She's been my best friend since college. We were roommates freshman year." As the evening progressed, Sophie found herself drawn to this mysterious man. He asked questions about her life, her dreams, her family, and actually listened to her answers. Unlike her previous dates, he didn't spend the whole night talking about himself. "My parents own a small hardware store in Ohio," Sophie shared. "They wanted me to take over the family business, but I always knew I wanted to teach." "Following your passion instead of expectations," Carter nodded. "That takes courage." "What about your family?" Sophie asked. A shadow passed over Carter's face. "Complicated," he said simply. "My father built a business, expecting me to be just like him. My mother died when I was young. I'm sorry," Sophie said softly. "That was a long time ago," he replied, his voice distant. Then he smiled, changing the subject. "Tell me about your students." By the time dessert arrived, Sophie had nearly forgotten this was a blind date. Conversation flowed easily between them, punctuated by laughter and meaningful glances. When the check came, Carter took it before Sophie could even reach for her wallet. "Please, let me get this," he said. "We could split it," Sophie offered. Carter smiled. "I insist. I've enjoyed tonight more than any evening in recent memory." Outside the restaurant, the night air was cool against Sophie's skin. She wasn't ready for the evening to end. "Would you like to take a walk?" Carter asked, as if reading her mind. They strolled through the nearby park, their hands occasionally brushing against each other. Sophie felt a flutter in her stomach each time it happened. "So, Jeff," Sophie said, "I have to admit you're not what I expected." Carter looked at her with an unreadable expression. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. "What were you expecting?" "Maggie described you as a finance guy." "I was picturing someone more, I don't know, boring." Sophie laughed. "But you're different, there's something about you." Under the soft glow of a park lamp, Carter stopped walking. "Sophie, His phone rang, interrupting whatever he was about to say. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "I need to take this, I'm sorry." He stepped away, speaking in hushed tones. Sophie couldn't hear what he was saying, but his posture had changed completely. Gone was the relaxed man she'd spent the evening with, replaced by someone tense and commanding. When he returned, his expression was apologetic. "I hate to cut this short, but something's come up at work." "At this hour?" Sophie asked, unable to hide her disappointment. "The markets never sleep," he said with a rueful smile. "May I call you? I'd like to see you again." Sophie hesitated only briefly before giving him her number. As he programmed it into his phone, she noticed it was much more expensive than she'd initially realized. "I'll call you tomorrow," he promised, then hesitated before leaning in to kiss her cheek. The brief contact sent warmth spreading through her. Sophie watched him walk away, disappearing into a sleek black car that pulled up to the curb almost immediately after he approached. The driver nodded respectfully before closing the door behind him. Definitely not just a regular finance guy, Sophie thought to herself. Liam Carter stared out the window of his car as the city lights blurred past. He hadn't meant to lie to her. When she'd mistaken him for her blind date, he should have corrected her immediately. But something in her genuine smile, the way she looked at him like he was just a normal person, not Liam Carter, billionaire CEO of Carter Industries, had made him play along. For once, someone saw him, not his bank account or his family name. "Sir, shall I take you directly to the office?" his driver asked, interrupting his thoughts. "Yes, Richard," Liam replied, loosening his tie completely. "Apparently there's a crisis with the Tokyo acquisition." As the car weaved through traffic, Liam couldn't stop thinking about Sophie Reynolds. He'd just met the woman, yet he felt more connected to her than anyone he'd dated in years. And now he'd started their relationship with a lie. He pulled out his phone, staring at her number. How could he explain this to her? "Sorry, I'm not Jeff. I'm actually Liam Carter, and I let you believe I was someone else because I liked that you didn't know I was rich and powerful. That would go over well." His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. "Board members waiting in conference room." Mr. Harrington particularly agitated about Tokyo situation. Liam sighed, putting thoughts of Sophie aside. Work now. Figure out his mess of a love life later. The next morning, Sophie hummed as she arranged desks in her classroom. She couldn't stop thinking about her date with Jeff. There was something magnetic about him, something beneath the surface she wanted to explore. "Someone's in a good mood," Maggie said, appearing in the doorway of Sophie's classroom with 2 coffee cups. "Spill it, how was the date?" Sophie accepted the coffee with a smile. It was surprisingly wonderful. He was charming, attentive, mysterious. Maggie raised an eyebrow. "Mysterious? Jeff?" "Yes," Sophie nodded. Though he didn't talk much about himself. "Mostly asked about me." A puzzled expression crossed Maggie's face. "That doesn't sound like the Jeff I know. He usually can't stop talking about his fantasy football league." Sophie frowned. Fantasy football? He didn't mention sports once. "Weird," Maggie said, taking a sip of her coffee. "Maybe he was nervous. Did he mention the accounting firm he works at?" Sophie's confusion deepened. "He said he worked in finance, but not specifically accounting." Maggie shrugged. "Well, the important thing is you. Liked him. Are you seeing him again?" "He said he'd call today," Sophie replied, a seed of doubt now planted in her mind. Throughout the day, as she helped her kindergartners with their alphabet projects, Sophie kept checking her phone. By afternoon, she had a text from an unknown number. "Sophie, it's Carter from last night. Dinner tonight? I know a place with the best pasta in the city." Sophie smiled, her doubts momentarily forgotten. She texted back a quick, "Yes," adding the time she'd be done with parent-teacher conferences. That evening, As she approached the Italian restaurant, she spotted him waiting outside. He looked even more handsome than she remembered, this time dressed in dark jeans and a blue button-down shirt that made his eyes seem even bluer. "You look beautiful," he said as she approached. Sophie blushed. "Thank you. This is a bit fancier than I expected," she added, noticing the upscale nature of the restaurant. "Too much?" he asked, suddenly concerned. "No, it's lovely," she assured him. "Just surprised." As they were seated, Sophie decided to clear up her confusion. "So, Maggie mentioned you work at an accounting firm. And something about fantasy football." Carter froze, his menu halfway to the table. A look of panic crossed his face, quickly replaced by resignation. "Sophie," he said slowly, "I need to tell you something." Just then, a well-dressed couple approached their table. "Liam Carter," the man said, extending his hand. "Thomas Reynolds, Reynolds Investments. I've been trying to get a meeting with you for months." Sophie looked between the stranger and her date, confusion evident on her face. "Liam, I thought your name was Jeff." The man who'd introduced himself as Thomas laughed. "Jeff? Everyone knows. Liam Carter, one of the youngest billionaires in the country." Sophie felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath her. She stared at the man across the table. Not Jeff Carter, her blind date, but Liam Carter, apparently some famous billionaire. "Billionaire?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. The color drained from Liam's face as he quickly shook Thomas's hand. "Good to meet you. My office will be in touch about that meeting, if you'll excuse us." Thomas nodded, looking between Sophie and Liam with interest before walking away. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. "You're not Jeff," Sophie finally said, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. "No," Liam admitted. "I'm not. And you let me believe you were my blind date all night?" "I was going to tell you," Liam started, but Sophie was already gathering her purse. "Was this funny to you, some kind of game?" Her voice trembled slightly. "Pretending to be someone else?" "No, Sophie, please." Liam reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Let me explain." "I think that man explained." "Enough," Sophie said, standing up. "Goodbye, Liam or Jeff or whoever you are." As she walked out of the restaurant, Sophie fought back tears. How could she have been so foolish? Of course, a man like that wouldn't be interested in a kindergarten teacher from Ohio. It had all been some elaborate joke. Meanwhile, Liam sat, frozen at the table, watching the first real connection he'd made in years walk away because of his deception. He had to make this right. Somehow he had to make Sophie understand that the only thing fake about their evening together was his name. 3 days had passed since Sophie stormed out of the restaurant, and she still couldn't shake Liam Carter from her thoughts. She'd done a quick internet search afterward and had been shocked by what she found. Liam Carter wasn't just wealthy, he was one of the country's most powerful businessmen, heir to the Carter Industries empire, with a net worth that made her annual teacher's salary look like pocket change. He probably laughed all the way home, Sophie muttered to herself as she arranged art supplies for her class. Poor, naive teacher falls for billionaire's game. The classroom door opened and Maggie poked her head in. "Hey, you okay? You've been avoiding my calls," Sophie sighed. "I'm fine, just been busy." "Liar," Maggie said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. "This is about that date, isn't it? Jeff called me all confused, saying you never showed up at Bella's Bistro. That's because I was sitting across from someone else who pretended to be Jeff," Sophie replied, her voice tight. "Some billionaire named Liam Carter thought it would be fun to play pretend with the kindergarten teacher." Maggie's eyes widened. "Wait, Liam Carter? The Liam Carter? Dark hair, killer blue eyes, looks like he stepped off a magazine cover? You pie. Know him?" "Know him." "Sophie, everyone knows who Liam Carter is. His family practically built this city." Maggie pulled out her phone and quickly brought up an article. "Look, he was just featured in Business Weekly's 40 Under 40 list." Sophie glanced at the screen, seeing a professional photo of Liam in a perfectly tailored suit, looking serious and intimidating, nothing like the warm, attentive man she'd spent the evening with. "Well, congratulations to him," Sophie said dismissively, turning back to her supplies. "Sophie, Aren't you curious why someone like Liam Carter would pretend to be your blind date? Before Sophie could answer, her classroom phone rang. Ms. Reynolds speaking. Ms. Reynolds, there's a delivery for you at the front office, the school secretary announced. I'll be right there. In the office, Sophie stopped short. A massive arrangement of sunflowers, her favorite flower, which she'd mentioned during her dinner, sat on the counter. She tentatively reached for the card attached. Sophie, please give me a chance to explain. I never meant to deceive you. What we shared was real. Liam's secret admirer, the secretary asked with a knowing smile. Just a misunderstanding, Sophie replied, taking the flowers. Back in her classroom, Maggie whistled. Those are gorgeous. From Liam. Sophie nodded, setting the flowers down. He wants to explain. And you don't want to hear it? Maggie asked, incredulous. Sophie, maybe there's more to the story. Like what? That he regularly pretends to be other people for fun. Or maybe, Maggie suggested gently, he liked that you didn't know who he was. Think about it. Everyone probably wants something from him. For once, someone just wanted his company. Sophie considered this, remembering how natural their conversation had felt, how he'd seemed genuinely interested in her stories about teaching, but still the hurt lingered. It doesn't matter, she finally said. We live in completely different worlds. To Akumikmais at the Carter Industries headquarters, Liam stared out of his office window, barely listening as his assistant, Diana, ran through his schedule. Mr. Carter, did you hear me? The investors from Singapore will be here in 20 minutes. Reschedule them, Liam said, turning away from the window. Diana's eyebrows shot up. Reschedule? But they flew in specifically to... Tell them I've been called to an emergency board meeting. Move them to tomorrow morning and send a gift basket to their hotel. Yes, sir. Diana hesitated. Also, a Ms. Maggie Wilson called. She says she's a friend of Sophie Reynolds. Liam's attention snapped fully to Diana. What did she say? She said Sophie received your flowers. She also said, and I'm quoting, if you really want to fix this, you need to grovel, not throw money at it. Despite his mood, Liam smiled slightly. She sounds like a good friend. She left her number if you want to call her back. Liam considered. This. Set up a meeting. Today, if possible. An hour later, Liam sat in a corner booth at a small coffee shop, far from his usual upscale haunts. He'd dressed down in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, hoping to attract less attention. The bell above the door rang, and a woman with curly red hair walked in, scanning the room. Spotting Liam, she headed directly to his table and sat down, without waiting for an invitation. So you're the famous Liam Carter, she said, studying him intently. And you're Maggie, he replied. Thank you for meeting me. I'm not here for you, I'm here for Sophie. Maggie leaned forward. She's my best friend and she doesn't deserve to be played with. I never intended to play with her feelings, Liam said sincerely. That night at the restaurant when she mistook me for her blind date, I should have corrected her immediately. But when she sat down looking at me like I was just a normal person, not a Carter, he shook his head. Do you know how rare that is in my life? Maggie's expression softened slightly. So you just went with it? It was selfish, Liam admitted, but every minute with her felt real in a way my life rarely does. I was going to tell her the truth that night in the park, but I got called away on business, and then at the restaurant, you got caught, Maggie finished for him. Yes. Liam ran a hand through his hair. I've been trying to reach her to explain, but she won't take my calls or answer my messages. Can you blame her? From her perspective, a wealthy, powerful man made her the butt of some joke. It wasn't like that, Liam insisted. Then what was it like? Liam was quiet for a moment. When you grow up with the kind of wealth and name recognition I have, you learn quickly that most people want something from you. They see the Carter, name, the money, the power. They don't see me. Sophie saw me. Maggie studied him, then nodded slightly. Okay. So what are you going to do about it? I don't know, Liam admitted. That's why I wanted to talk to you. You know her better than anyone. Well, for starters, fancy flowers delivered to her workplace might impress other women, but Sophie isn't interested in grand gestures or your money. If you're serious about her, You need to show her who you really are. Not Liam Carter, the billionaire, but the man she connected with that night. Liam considered this. I need to see her in person. Can you help me? Maggie hesitated, then sighed. She volunteers at the community center every Thursday evening, helping with adult literacy classes. That's tomorrow. But I'm warning you, if you hurt her again, I don't care how rich or powerful you are, I will make you regret it. Liam smiled, genuinely this time. I believe you. And thank you. Thursday. The next evening, Sophie sat at a table in the community center, helping a middle-aged woman named Maria practice her reading skills. The center was busy with various classes and activities, the rooms filled with people of all ages from the neighborhood. You're doing great, Maria, Sophie encouraged, as the woman carefully worked through a paragraph. Your progress since last month is amazing. Thank you, Miss Sophie, Maria beamed. My grandchildren, they proud I can now read them stories. Sophie smiled warmly. That's wonderful. Let's try the next. She stopped mid-sentence as she glanced up and saw Liam standing in the doorway of the classroom. He was dressed casually in jeans and a simple grey sweater, looking nothing like the powerful CEO she'd seen in business magazines. For a moment, he reminded her of the man she'd met that first night. Just Carter, the finance guy with the warm smile. Maria followed Sophie's gaze. Is something wrong? No, everything's fine, Sophie assured her quickly. Let's finish this page and then we'll take a short break. Sophie tried to focus on the lesson, but she was acutely aware of Liam waiting patiently by the door. After a few minutes, she excused herself and approached him, arms crossed defensively. What are you doing here? I needed to see you, Liam said quietly. Can we talk, please? Sophie glanced back at her students, then nodded reluctantly. 5 minutes. There's a break room down the hall. In the small break room, with its outdated furniture and coffee-stained counter, Liam looked out of place despite his casual clothes. Sophie kept her distance, leaning against the wall. How did you find me here? Maggie, Liam admitted, but don't be mad at her. She only told me because she thinks you should hear me out. Sophie sighed. Fine, I'm listening. First, I want to apologize. I should have told you who I was right away. Liam took a step toward her, then stopped when she tensed. But Sophie, that night when you sat down at my table and started talking to me like I was just a regular guy, do you know how rare that is for me? Every day, I'm surrounded by people who want something from me, who see me as a Carter first, and a person second. So you lied to me because it was convenient for you? No, Liam shook his head. I lied because for the first time in years, I felt like someone was seeing me for me. Not my family name, not my bank account, just me. Despite herself, Sophie felt her resolve weakening. You could have told me the truth later that night, or when you called for a second date. I know I wanted to tell you in the park, but then work called and... He stopped, knowing it sounded like an excuse. You're right. I should have told you. I was afraid you'd look at me differently once you knew, and I wasn't ready for that to change. Sophie was quiet for a moment, processing his words. The things we talked about, was any of that real? Or was that part of the act too? All of it was real, Liam said firmly. Everything I told you about my life was true. My father building the business, my mother dying young, feeling trapped by expectations. I just left out the scale of it all. A timer on Sophie's phone beeped. I have to get back to my students. Sophie, please, Liam said as she moved toward the door. I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. I'm just asking for a chance to show you who I really am, all of me this time. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Sophie felt that same connection they'd shared on their first night together. I don't know, Liam. I need time to think. Take all the time you need, he said. But first, would you consider having dinner with me tomorrow night? Just dinner. A fresh start. Sophie hesitated. Where? Not at some fancy restaurant, Liam assured her. I want to show you something important to me. Something real. Against her better judgment, Sophie found herself nodding. Okay. One dinner. Relief washed over Liam's face. I'll pick you up at 7. As Sophie returned to her class, she wondered if she was making a mistake. But something in Liam's eyes, a vulnerability she'd glimpsed during their first meeting, made her want to give him one more chance. The following evening, Sophie waited outside her modest apartment building, second-guessing her decision to see Liam again. Part of her expected him to arrive in some flashy sports car with a driver, proving that his talk of wanting to be real with her was just more empty words. She was surprised when a simple black SUV pulled up, with Liam himself behind the wheel. He got out and walked around to open her door, looking nervous in a way she wouldn't have expected from a powerful CEO. "Thank you for giving me this chance," he said as she got in. "Don't make me regret it," Sophie replied, though her tone was softer than her words. Instead of heading downtown toward the city's upscale districts, Liam drove them to a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. They pulled up to an unassuming house with a well-maintained garden. "Where are we?" Sophie asked, confused. "This is my home," Liam said. "Not the penthouse everyone thinks I live in, not the mansion in the hills that's featured in magazines. This is where I actually live." Sophie looked at him skeptically. "You expect me to believe that Liam Carter, billionaire CEO, lives in a normal house in the suburbs?" "Come inside," he said simply. As they entered the house, Sophie was struck by how comfortable and lived in it felt. The furniture was nice but not ostentatious, family photos lined the walls, and books were stacked on coffee tables. "I bought this place 5 years ago," Liam explained as he led her to the kitchen. "After my father died and I took over the company, I needed somewhere that felt like mine, not his. Somewhere away from the Carter legacy." He began pulling ingredients from the refrigerator. "I hope you like Italian. I make a pretty decent lasagna." "You cook?" Sophie couldn't hide her surprise. Liam smiled. "Another thing most people don't know about me. My mother taught me before she died. It's one of the few memories I have of her." As he moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, Sophie watched him, seeing glimpses of the man she'd connected with on their first date. Here, away from the trappings of wealth and power, he seemed more relaxed, more authentic. "Can I help?" she asked finally. "Sure," Liam nodded, looking pleased. "You can chop these vegetables if you want." As they worked side by side preparing dinner, the tension between them gradually eased. By the time they sat down to eat, Sophie found herself laughing at Liam's stories about disastrous board meetings and his early attempts at cooking. "So this is the real Liam Carter," Sophie said, taking a sip of wine. "A closet chef who hides in the suburbs." "Part of him," Liam nodded. "I won't lie to you, Sophie, my life is complicated. The business, the responsibility, the public scrutiny, it's all real too, but this," he gestured around the kitchen, "this is where I feel most like myself." Sophie studied him across the table. "Why show me this? You could have taken me anywhere to try to impress me." "Because I don't want to impress you," Liam said quietly. "I want you to know me, the real me, and I hope that's enough." Their eyes met, and Sophie felt that same connection from their first night together, only this time with no lies between them. "I think," she said carefully, "that I'd like to get to know the real Liam Carter." The smile that spread across his face was worth all the confusion and hurt of the past days. As he reached across the table to take her hand, Sophie knew they were starting something new, something built on truth this time. What neither of them noticed was the car, parked down the street, with a telephoto lens aimed directly at Liam's kitchen window. Inside sat Victor Ramsey, Liam's business rival, a man who had been looking for a weakness in the famously private CEO for years. "Well, well," Victor murmured, snapping several photos of Sophie and Liam. "What do we have here? The untouchable. Liam Carter, finally showing his heart." He lowered the camera with a satisfied smile. "This could be very useful indeed." The morning sun streamed through the windows of Liam's office as he reviewed contract proposals with unusual enthusiasm. The past 2 weeks with Sophie had been the happiest he could remember in years. They'd gone on simple dates, walks in the park, movie nights at his house, even a school carnival where Sophie's students had been delighted to meet Ms. Reynolds's boyfriend. The word still felt new to Liam. At 35, he'd had relationships before, but they'd always felt like business arrangements, partnerships of convenience with women who valued his wealth and status. With Sophie, everything was different. Knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called. Diana entered, her expression concerned. "Mr. Carter, there's something you need to see." She placed a tablet on his desk. This was published on the Celebrity Insider website an hour ago. Liam's blood ran cold as he saw the headline, "Billionaire Bachelor Liam Carter's Secret Romance with Ordinary Teacher." Below the headline were photos, Sophie and Liam at his house having dinner, leaving a movie theater hand in hand, Sophie laughing as Liam pushed a child on a swing at the school carnival. Their private moments, now public entertainment. How did they get these? Liam demanded, anger rising in his chest. "I don't know, sir," Diana replied, "but the story is spreading quickly. Several major news outlets have already picked it up." Liam grabbed his phone to call Sophie, then realized she would be teaching. The last thing she needed was to find out about this from him while surrounded by her students. "Clear my schedule for the afternoon," he told Diana, "and find out who's responsible for these photos." "Yes, sir. Also, Mr. Ramsey's office called again. He's quite insistent about meeting with you regarding the West Coast merger." Liam frowned. Victor Ramsey had been unusually persistent lately about a partnership that Liam had little interest in pursuing. "Tell him I'll call him next week." After Diana left, Liam tried to focus on work, but his mind kept returning to Sophie. She valued her privacy and simple life. How would she handle being thrust into the spotlight as Liam Carter's latest conquest? Sophie was helping a student with a math problem when her classroom phone rang. "Ms. Reynolds? There are several people in the front office asking to speak with you. They say they're from the press," the school secretary said, sounding confused. "The press? There must be some mistake," Sophie replied. "They're asking about your relationship with Liam Carter." Sophie felt her stomach drop. "Tell them I'm in class and can't be disturbed, and please don't let them into the school." Hanging up, Sophie tried to maintain her composure for her students, but inside she was panicking. How did the press know about her and Liam? They'd been so careful, spending time together away from public places. At lunch break, she slipped into the teacher's lounge and found several colleagues huddled around a computer. "Sophie," Maggie called, looking up with wide eyes. "Have you seen this?" Sophie leaned over her friend's shoulder and gasped. There on the screen was a photo of her and Liam in his kitchen, along with several other pictures from their private dates. The article described her as a plain Jane teacher who had somehow captured the heart of America's most eligible bachelor. Sophie felt sick. "This can't be happening." Her phone buzzed with a text from Liam. "Just saw the article. I'm so sorry. Can we talk after school? I'll pick you up." As Sophie returned to her classroom, she noticed parents in the hallway glancing at her and whispering. By the time the final bell rang, her phone was flooded with messages from friends and family who had seen the news. When she walked out of the school's side entrance, Liam was waiting in his SUV. She slipped in quickly, thankful to avoid the small group of photographers gathered at the main entrance. "Are you okay?" Liam asked, genuine concern in his eyes. "Not really," Sophie admitted. "I had parents taking photos of me at pickup time. My principal called me in to discuss maintaining the school's reputation. And my mother has called 14 times, asking if you're really a billionaire and why I didn't tell her I was dating someone important." Liam winced. "I'm so sorry, Sophie. This isn't what I wanted for you." "I know it's not your fault," she sighed. "But Liam, I'm a private person. I chose teaching because I love it, not because I want attention. I don't know if I can handle this." "We'll figure it out," Liam promised, taking her hand. "Together." He drove them to a small lakeside park outside the city where they could talk without prying eyes. As they walked along the shore, Liam explained that he'd already set his security team to investigating the source of the photos. "This isn't just about invasion of privacy," he said. "The timing feels deliberate, like someone's trying to distract me." "From what?" Sophie asked. "I'm not sure. There's a major acquisition Carter Industries is pursuing. If it goes through, we'll control a significant portion of the technology market on the West Coast. There are people who don't want that to happen." Sophie stopped walking. "You think someone exposed our relationship to sabotage your business deal?" "It wouldn't be the first time someone has tried to use my personal life against me," Liam admitted. "It's one of the reasons I've been so private." Sophie was quiet for a moment, absorbing this new reality, that being with Liam meant not just dealing with his wealth and status, but also becoming a potential target for his enemies. "I don't want this to change us," she finally said. But I need to know what I'm getting into, Liam. All of it. Liam nodded solemnly. No more secrets. I promise. Victor Ramsey smiled as he watched the news coverage of Liam Carter's newly exposed relationship. The photos had been worth every penny he'd paid his private investigator. Now, with Carter distracted by personal drama, Victor could make his move on the West Coast deal. Mr. Harrington is here to see you, his assistant announced. James Harrington, a longtime board member at Carter Industries, entered the office looking nervous. Have a seat, James, Victor said smoothly. I assume you've seen the news about your CEO? It's unfortunate, Harrington replied stiffly, but hardly relevant to business, isn't it? Victor raised an eyebrow. Liam Carter, notorious for his focus and discipline, suddenly distracted by a schoolteacher. It makes one wonder if he's still the right person to lead Carter Industries through its expansion. Harrington shifted uncomfortably. The board has complete confidence in Liam. Of course, Victor nodded. But if the West Coast deal falls through because he's too busy with his new romance? He let the sentence hang. What exactly are you proposing, Victor? A partnership. Ramsey Enterprises and Carter Industries. Together we could dominate the market. And you, James, could be instrumental in making it happen. Victor slid a folder across the desk. These are the terms I'm prepared to offer, including a special consulting position for you with a very generous compensation package. Harrington hesitated before taking the folder. The board would never approve a partnership with you. Liam considers you a rival. Liam might not be in a position to object if certain information came to light, Victor said meaningfully. Information about how the Carter fortune was really built. Harrington's face paled. You're talking about the Milton acquisition. That was 15 years ago. Edward Carter, not Liam, was CEO then. Yes, but how would it look for the company now? For Liam's reputation? The press is already focused on him. Imagine if they learned his family's empire was built on fraud. This is blackmail, Victor smiled coldly. This is business, James. Think it over, but don't take too long. After Harrington left, Victor turned to the window, satisfied. The plan was in motion. Soon, Carter Industries would be vulnerable, and he would be there to pick up the pieces. For Sophie, the next few days were a crash course in life, as the girlfriend of Liam Carter. Photographers followed her to work. Reporters called the school so frequently that the principal had to issue a statement asking for privacy. Former boyfriends were tracked down for interviews about what it was like to date the woman who captured Liam Carter's heart. Despite the chaos, Sophie was determined not to let it change her life or her relationship with Liam. They still had dinner at his house, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still found moments of normalcy amidst the craziness. On Friday evening, Liam surprised her by cooking her favorite meal and setting up a picnic in his backyard, away from prying eyes. To surviving our first media scandal, he toasted, clinking his glass against hers. Sophie laughed. Is that what we're celebrating? That, and 1 month since our first date, Liam said softly. The best month of my life. Sophie's heart warmed at his words. Despite the complications, she couldn't imagine not having Liam in her life now. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small velvet box. Sophie's eyes widened. Liam, it's not a ring, he assured her quickly, opening the box to reveal a delicate silver bracelet with a small sunflower charm. Not yet, anyway. But I wanted you to have something to remind you that no matter what happens with the press or my business, what we have is real. Tears welled in Sophie's eyes as he fastened the bracelet around her wrist. It's beautiful. You've changed my life, Sophie Reynolds, Liam said, his voice thick with emotion. For the first time I'm living, not just existing. Their kiss was interrupted by Liam's phone buzzing insistently. He checked it with a frown. It's Diana. She wouldn't call unless it was important. Sophie nodded. Take it. Liam stepped away to answer the call, his expression growing more serious by the second. When he returned, the relaxed happiness of moments before had been replaced by tension. What's wrong? Sophie asked. There's a problem at the office. Someone leaked confidential information about the West Coast deal. The board is calling an emergency. Meeting tonight. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I'm sorry, I have to go. It's okay, Sophie assured him. Do what you need to do. As Liam drove to the office, his mind raced. First the photos of him and Sophie, now a major corporate leak. These couldn't be coincidences. Someone was targeting him personally and professionally. The boardroom was already full when he arrived, the tension palpable. James Harrington stood at the head of the table, looking grave. "Thank you for joining us, Liam," Harrington said, his tone formal. "We've called this meeting to discuss the recent developments." "The leak," Liam nodded. "I've already got our security team tracing the source." "Not just the leak," Harrington clarified. "There are also concerns about your recent personal distractions." Liam's jaw tightened. "My personal life has no bearing on my ability to run this company." "The board disagrees," Harrington replied. "With the West Coast deal in jeopardy and your attention clearly divided, some of us feel it might be time for a change in leadership." Liam stared in disbelief. "A change in leadership? You're talking about removing me as CEO? My father built this company." "Yes, about that," Harrington said, sliding a folder across the table. "We've received some troubling information about how your father acquired Milton Technologies, the acquisition that made Carter Industries what it is today." Liam opened the folder, scanning the documents inside with growing alarm. "Where did you get these?" "That's not important," Harrington replied. "What matters is that they suggest your father obtained Milton through fraudulent means. If this information went public, it would devastate the company." "These are fake," Liam said firmly. "My father would never—" "We can't take that risk," Harrington interrupted. "The board has voted. You are being placed on temporary leave while we investigate these allegations. In the meantime, we're considering a partnership with Ramsey Enterprises to stabilize the company." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. Victor Ramsey is behind this, Liam realized. He's the one who leaked the photos of me and Sophie, who provided these forged documents. "That's a serious accusation," Harrington frowned. "It's the truth," Liam insisted, "and I can prove it. I just need time." "You have 1 week," Harrington said after a moment of consideration. 1 week to disprove these allegations and secure the West Coast deal. If you fail, the board will vote to remove you permanently and proceed with the Ramsey partnership." Sophie was grading papers at her kitchen table when there was a knock at her door. Assuming it was Liam, she opened it without checking, only to find herself face to face with a sharply dressed man she didn't recognize. "Ms. Reynolds, Victor Ramsey," the man introduced himself with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "May I? Come in. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance to discuss." Sophie hesitated, remembering the name from Liam's concerns about business rivals. "I don't think we have anything to talk about, Mr. Ramsey." "Oh, I think we do," Victor said pleasantly. "It concerns Liam's future, and potentially yours." Against her better judgment, Sophie let him in, keeping her phone in her hand in case she needed to call for help. "What do you want?" she asked directly. "I admire your forthrightness," Victor replied, looking around her modest apartment with barely concealed disdain. "I won't waste your time. I want you to end your relationship with Liam Carter." Sophie stared at him in disbelief. "Excuse me? Liam is facing some challenges at work. The board is concerned about his judgment, his focus, his father left behind. Certain problems that are now coming to light." Victor's tone was casual, as if discussing the weather rather than attempting to manipulate her life. "And you think our relationship is the problem?" Sophie asked incredulously. "I think you're a distraction he can't afford right now, one he'll resent eventually." Victor reached into his pocket and withdrew a check, placing it on her coffee table. "This should ease the transition." Sophie glanced at the check and felt her blood boil when she saw the amount. $1 million. "Get out," she said quietly. "Ms. Reynolds, be reasonable." "Get out," Sophie repeated, louder this time. "And take your money with you. I won't be bribed to leave someone I care about." Victor's pleasant demeanor slipped, revealing a coldness beneath. "You're making a mistake. Liam Carter lives in a world you can't possibly understand. When his company fails, and it will, he'll blame you. The pretty teacher who made him lose focus at the most critical moment of his career." "Liam isn't like that," Sophie said firmly. "Now leave before I call the police." After Victor left, Sophie called Liam immediately, her hands shaking. "Sophie, what's wrong?" Liam answered, hearing the distress in her voice. "Victor Ramsey was just here," she said. "He offered me money to break up with you." There was a long pause before Liam responded, his voice tight with controlled fury. "I'm coming over. Lock your doors and don't let anyone else in." 20 minutes. Later, Liam was at her apartment, pulling her into a fierce embrace. "Are you okay? Did he threaten you?" "No, just tried to bribe me," Sophie assured him, leading him to the couch. "Liam, what's going on?" "He said something about the board being concerned about problems your father left behind." Liam sighed heavily, then told her everything. The emergency board meeting, the allegations against his father, the ultimatum he'd been given. "So if you don't fix this in a week, you lose your company?" Sophie asked, horrified. "The company? My father built, yes." Liam nodded grimly. "Ramsey has been trying to take over Carter Industries for years. He's finally found a weakness to exploit. And he thinks I'm part of that weakness," Sophie said quietly, "that I'm distracting you." Liam took her hands in his. "You are not a distraction, Sophie. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. And I'm not going to let Victor Ramsey or anyone else come between us. But your company is important to me," Liam acknowledged, "but not more important than you. We're going to fight this together. I just need to find proof that my father acquired Milton Technologies legally and that Ramsey is behind the leaks and the forged documents." "How can I help?" Sophie asked without hesitation. Liam looked at her with surprise, then gratitude. "You still want to be part of this mess?" "I want to be part of your life," Sophie said simply. "All of it, the good and the bad." Liam pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed by her loyalty. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not," Sophie teased, trying to lighten the moment. "But you're stuck with me anyway." As they held each other, both knew the coming days would test not only Liam's business acumen, but also the strength of their relationship. With his company, his family legacy, and his heart all on the line, Liam had never had more to lose or more to fight for. Outside Sophie's apartment, in an unmarked car, one of Victor Ramsey's men snapped photos of Liam's car parked in front. The trap was set. Now it was just a matter of watching the pieces fall into place. The clock was ticking. 5 days had passed since the board meeting, and Liam was running out of time to save Carter Industries. He'd barely slept, spending every waking hour searching through his father's old files, interviewing former executives, and trying to find proof that the Milton acquisition had been legitimate. Sophie had been his rock through it all. Despite the media circus that still followed her and the whispers from parents at her school, she remained steadfast. Each night, she would come to his house after work, bringing dinner and a determination that matched his own. They would spread papers across his dining room table, searching for any clue that might help. "Look at this," Sophie said on the 5th night, holding up a faded letter. "It's from your father to someone named Margaret Milton, dated 2 weeks before the acquisition." Liam took the letter, scanning its contents. Margaret was Harold Milton's wife. "My father was writing to thank her for her hospitality during a dinner party," he sighed. "It's friendly, but there's nothing here that helps us." Sophie frowned, thinking, "Wait, this mentions that your father was grateful for photos of some fishing trip they shared. Where would those be?" "I don't know," Liam admitted. "My father kept personal mementos in a safe at our family home, but I haven't been there in years, not since he died." "Then that's where we need to look," Sophie said decisively. An hour later, they pulled up to the imposing Carter family mansion. Unlike Liam's warm, modest home, this place screamed wealth and power, cold marble, priceless art, and immaculate gardens that no one ever enjoyed. "I grew up here," Liam said as he unlocked the front door, "but it never felt like home." Sophie squeezed his hand. "Show me where the safe is." They made their way to Edward Carter's study, a room frozen in time since his death. Books lined the walls, a massive desk dominated the space, and family photos sat in silver frames. Liam went directly to a painting of a sailboat, swinging it aside to reveal a wall safe. "Do you know the combination?" Sophie asked. Liam nodded. "My birthday. It was the only sentimental thing about my father." He spun the dial and the safe clicked open. Inside were stacks of documents, jewelry boxes containing his mother's pieces, and several photo albums. Liam pulled everything out, setting it on the desk. "Here," he said, opening an album labeled Personal 1990s. This would be around the time of the Milton acquisition. They flipped through pages of photographs, formal business events, family, holidays, and finally a series of pictures showing Edward Carter and Harold Milton on a fishing trip. The two men were smiling, holding up their catches, looking like old friends rather than business rivals. They knew each other well before the acquisition, Sophie noted. "Yes, but that doesn't prove the deal was legitimate," Liam sighed, about to close the album when Sophie stopped him. "Wait," she said, pointing to the corner of one photo. "What's that they're looking at?" Liam peered closer. In the background, the two men were examining papers spread on a table at their fishing cabin. "It looks like documents of some kind." He flipped to the next photo, which showed a clearer view. "These are architectural drawings, but what for?" Sophie squinted at the photo. "Can we enlarge this somehow?" Liam took a picture of the photo with his phone and zoomed in. "It's a building design. See the letterhead? Milton Carter Research Center." They were planning a joint venture, Sophie realized. Before the acquisition, Liam's mind raced. That would explain. Father always said the Milton acquisition wasn't hostile, that Harold had approached him. If they were already working on projects together. He returned to the safe, digging deeper, and pulled out a sealed envelope marked Milton Agreement, Personal Copy. With trembling hands, Liam opened it, unfolding a handwritten agreement signed by both Edward Carter and Harold Milton. "This is it," he breathed, reading quickly. A personal agreement between them. Milton was dying, cancer, and wanted to ensure his company's future. He approached my father about an acquisition rather than letting it fall to competitors who would dismantle it. They agreed that Carter Industries would maintain the Milton name on certain divisions and continue their joint research projects. "So the acquisition wasn't fraudulent at all," Sophie said. "It was planned by both of them." "This proves Ramsey's documents are forgeries," Liam said, hope filling his voice for the first time in days. "But we still need to prove he's behind everything." Sophie bit her lip, thinking, what if we set a trap? The next morning, James Harrington arrived at his office to find a message requesting an urgent meeting with Liam. When he entered the conference room, he was surprised to find not only Liam but also Sophie Reynolds and Diana, Liam's assistant. "This is highly irregular," Harrington frowned. "Ms. Reynolds has no place in a business meeting." "Actually, she does," Liam said calmly. "Thanks to Sophie, I've found proof that the Milton acquisition was completely legitimate. My father and Harold Milton had a personal agreement." He slid copies of the handwritten agreement and photos across the table. Harrington examined them, his expression unreadable. "This is compelling," he finally admitted. "But it doesn't explain the leak about the West Coast deal or address the board's concerns about your focus." "That's why I asked you here," Liam replied. "I know who's behind the leaks and the forged documents. The same person who tried to bribe Sophie to leave me." "Victor Ramsey," Sophie added. Harrington shifted uncomfortably. "That's a serious accusation without proof." "Which is why we're going to get that proof today," Liam said. "With your help." "My help?" Harrington repeated, surprised. "I need you to meet with Ramsey. Tell him I'm finished, that the board has seen enough and is ready to vote me out. Tell him I've been too distracted trying to save my relationship to mount a proper defense." Harrington hesitated. "And why would I do this?" "Because despite everything, I believe you care about this company," Liam said, meeting the older man's eyes. "And because Victor Ramsey doesn't just want to partner with Carter Industries, he wants to strip it for parts, fire half the workforce, and absorb what's left into Ramsey Enterprises." "He told you this?" Harrington asked Sophie. She nodded. "He was quite open about his plans when he thought he was about to get what he wanted." Harrington was quiet for a long moment. "Ramsey did approach me," he finally admitted. "He had the documents about Milton, claimed he was trying to save Carter Industries from scandal. I believed him." "Help us prove he's behind all this," Liam urged, "for the company's sake." After a moment's consideration, Harrington nodded. "What do you need me to do?" Victor Ramsey smiled as he entered the upscale restaurant where Harrington had asked to meet him. According to Harrington's call, the board was ready to vote Liam out, and the path to acquiring Carter Industries was clear. Everything was falling into place. "James," Victor greeted as he sat down at the private table in the back. "I assume you have good news for me." "Very good news," Harrington nodded, seeming nervous. "The board meets tomorrow morning. Liam Carter will be removed as CEO and will announce the partnership with Ramsey Enterprises immediately after." "Excellent," Victor said, signaling for champagne. "Carter proved easier to topple than I expected. All it took was a pretty teacher and some well-timed leaks." "About those leaks," Harrington said carefully. "The board is concerned about how that information got out. And the documents regarding the Milton acquisition, we need to be sure they're authentic before we make any public statements." Victor waved dismissively. "The documents are convincing enough. Once Carter is out and we've merged the companies, no one will care about ancient history." "So you're admitting the documents are fake?" Harrington asked, his hand moving slightly toward his jacket pocket. "I'm admitting they serve their purpose," Victor replied coldly. "Just like the photographs of Carter and his teacher girlfriend and the leaked details of the West Coast deal." "You orchestrated all of that?" "Of course I did," Victor said with a smug smile. "Carter was untouchable until I found his weakness. Now his company is mine and his little romance is just collateral damage." "And what happens to the employees?" Harrington asked. "Carter Industries employs thousands of people. Redundancies will be eliminated," Victor said dismissively. "That's business. I'd keep about 40% of the workforce, absorb the profitable divisions and sell off the rest." Harrington nodded slowly. "I see. And my position in all this?" "A generous consulting contract as promised," Victor assured him. "For your cooperation." "You mean for betraying Liam Carter?" Harrington clarified. "Call it what you want," Victor shrugged. "The point is we won." "I wouldn't be so sure about that," came a voice from behind them. Victor froze, then turned to see Liam Carter standing there, along with Sophie Reynolds and 2 police officers. "What is this?" Victor demanded. Harrington reached into his pocket and placed a small recording device on the table. "Evidence, I believe." "You recorded our conversation," Victor hissed. "That's illegal." "Not in this state with one-party consent," one of the officers informed him. "Mr. Ramsey, we'd like you to come with us. We have some questions about corporate espionage, attempted bribery, and forgery of legal documents." As the officers led a stunned Victor away, Liam turned to Harrington. "Thank you for doing the right thing." Harrington nodded grimly. "He would have destroyed everything your father built. I couldn't let that happen." He extended his hand to Liam. "I'll make sure the board hears the full story." After Harrington left, Sophie took Liam's hand. "It's over." "Almost," Liam said. "There's still one more thing I need to do." The following morning, the boardroom at Carter Industries was filled to capacity. Every board member was present, along with key executives and, surprisingly, Sophie Reynolds, who sat quietly in the back. Liam stood at the head of the table, projecting a confidence he hadn't felt in days. "Thank you all for coming. Before we address the allegations against me and my father, I want to share some news. Victor Ramsey was arrested last night for corporate espionage, forgery, and attempted bribery." Murmurs rippled through the room as Liam explained everything. Ramsey's scheme to discredit him personally and professionally, the forged documents about the Milton acquisition, and the trap they had set to catch him. "These are the original documents regarding my father's acquisition of Milton Technologies," Liam said, distributing copies around the table. "As you can see, it was not only legitimate, but done at Harold Milton's request. Furthermore, I've secured the West Coast deal that Ramsey was trying to sabotage." The tension in the room noticeably eased as board members reviewed the evidence. "There's one more thing," Liam continued. "Recent events have made me reevaluate my priorities. I've always seen Carter Industries as my responsibility, my burden to carry alone. But I've learned that having the right partner makes any challenge easier to face." His eyes found Sophie's and she smiled encouragingly. "I'm not stepping down," Liam clarified, "but I am proposing a restructuring of our leadership. I've asked Diana Thompson, who has been my right hand for 5 years, to take on the role of Chief Operating Officer. This will allow me to focus on strategic vision, while ensuring day-to-day operations have the attention they deserve. He paused, looking around the table. I'm committed to this company's future, but I'm also committed to having a life beyond these walls. I hope I can count on your support. After a moment of silence, James Harrington stood up. I move that we accept Mr. Carter's proposals and express our full confidence in his leadership. The vote was unanimous. As the meeting adjourned, board members approached. Liam one by one offering congratulations and support. When they had all gone, Sophie came to his side. How does it feel? She asked. Like a weight has been lifted, Liam admitted. But also like I'm starting something new. Something better. I'm proud of you, Sophie said softly. Liam took her hand. I couldn't have done it without you, you know that, right? You saw something in me that night at the restaurant. Not Liam Carter, the CEO, but just me. You made me believe I could be more than my father's son, more than this company. I just saw the real you, Sophie smiled. That's all. And loved. Me anyway, Liam asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. And loved you because of it, Sophie corrected him. Liam's heart swelled at her words. I love you too, Sophie Reynolds. More than I thought possible. In that moment, surrounded by the trappings of corporate power that had once defined him, Liam realized none of it mattered without her. His future, their future, was what he wanted to build now. 6 months later, the garden of Liam's house was transformed for the occasion. White tents had been set up, twinkling lights hung from trees, and tables were arranged across the lawn. But unlike the society events Liam had attended his whole life, this gathering was intimate. Just 60 people, all who truly mattered to the couple. Sophie's kindergarten students had created handmade decorations, which hung alongside elegant flower arrangements. Her parents chatted comfortably with Liam's business associates, while Maggie supervised the final touches on the cake she had insisted on making herself. In the master bedroom, Sophie stood before the mirror, smoothing the simple but elegant white dress she had chosen. It wasn't the designer gown people might expect the future Mrs. Carter to wear, but it was perfectly her, just as this backyard wedding was perfectly them. You look beautiful, Maggie said, adjusting Sophie's veil. Are you nervous? Not even. A little, Sophie replied with a smile. Which is strange considering there are reporters camped outside the neighborhood trying to get photos. After the Ramsey scandal, the media's interest in Liam and Sophie had only intensified. Their love story, the billionaire and the teacher who met by chance and then fought together to save his company, had captured the public's imagination. But they had refused to sell their wedding photos to magazines or turn their day into a spectacle. A knock at the door announced Sophie's father, ready to walk her down the aisle. It's time, sweetheart, he said, his eyes misty with pride. Outside, guests had taken their seats in the garden, where a simple arch covered in sunflowers marked the spot where Liam waited. When the music began and Sophie appeared, his breath caught. She was radiant, her smile brighter than any diamond. As she reached him, Liam took her hands, his voice slightly unsteady as he whispered, You are even more beautiful than the night. You sat down at my table by mistake. Best mistake I ever made, Sophie whispered back. Their vows were simple and heartfelt. Liam promised to always be honest, to share both his burdens and his joys, to remember that the most valuable thing in his life wasn't his company or his fortune, but the love they had found. Sophie promised to always see him for who he truly was, to stand by him through whatever challenges came their way, and to fill their home with laughter and sunflowers. As they exchanged rings, Sophie noticed tears in Liam's eyes, the powerful CEO unafraid to show his emotions in front of everyone who mattered to him. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the officiant declared. You may kiss the bride. Their kiss was met with cheers and applause, but for Sophie and Liam the world narrowed to just the two of them, a moment of perfect connection, just like that first night when fate had brought them together. The celebration that followed was joyful and relaxed. There was dancing under the stars, heartfelt toasts and moments of quiet laughter. Sophie's students performed a special song they had practiced for weeks, bringing smiles to everyone's faces. Later, as the evening wound down, Sophie and Liam slipped away from the party to stand at the edge of the garden, looking up at the night sky. Happy? Liam asked, his arm around her waist. Completely, Sophie nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. Though I still can't believe. I'm Mrs. Carter now. I think you'll always be Ms. Reynolds to your students, Liam chuckled. And Sophie to me. My Sophie, who saw me when no one else did. And you're still the same man who pretended to be my blind date, Sophie teased, just with a different name tag. Liam laughed, then grew serious. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. How different our lives would be if you hadn't sat at my table that night. If I had told you right away that I wasn't Jeff. I believe we would have found each other anyway, Sophie said softly. Some things are just meant to be. Liam looked down at her, love shining in his eyes. When did you know? That what we had was real, despite how it started. Sophie thought for a moment. When you showed me your real home. Not the mansion. Not the penthouse everyone thought you lived in, but your actual home. That's when I knew you were sharing your true self with me. And I always will, Liam promised, kissing her gently. From the tent, they could hear Maggie calling for them. It was time to cut the cake. Hand in hand, they walked back to join their guests to celebrate the love that had begun with a case of mistaken identity and grown into something neither of them had expected, but both had always wanted. A love built on truth, trust, and the courage to be seen for who they really were. As confetti flew and cameras flashed, Sophie and Liam shared a private smile. A silent acknowledgement of their journey from strangers to soulmates, from a chance encounter to a lifetime commitment. Their story wasn't the fairy tale of a billionaire sweeping a commoner off her feet. It was the real-life romance of two people who found in each other exactly what they needed, but never knew they were looking for. Sometimes the best love stories begin with accidents, and sometimes those accidents turn out to be the most fortunate twists of fate. The end.